feel like it's a bit of a stitch-up introing your boss, because if I'm too sucky, I'm playing teacher's pet and my team's gonna grill me for it tomorrow. But if I'm not sucky enough, then I'm no longer the favourite, so that's awkward. But look, Dialogue Chairman Christopher Brown is a champion of the West. He will describe himself as a father, a farmer, and a facilitator, but he is so much more, and I think everyone in this room knows the same. He's a visionary, obsessed with Greater Western Sydney, and this region is better for it. Please welcome Christopher Brown.
12 out of 10, Faith. She's not bad for a part-time MC, is she? Now, my formal part of the evening is to call someone up on stage. I was going to call him a mate, but that gets people in trouble whenever you say it these days. You're not allowed to have ever known anybody in the past. You never have voted the same ever. You've never worked in the same office. You've never heard of them. You've never met their wife, their family, anything. Bugger it. Josh Murray's a great fella. He's the Secretary of Transport, and you've read a lot about him in the press. It might be time to hear from him on stage. Josh, come and join me. We're going bar stools. Here you go. Come on over. I'm told I got to sit this side because they get a good view of the cameras and you're much better looking than me. So that's what all the women in my office told me to say. So anyway, mate, let's slay the dragon early. It's been an interesting start to your newest career. It's not your first career. Most people in the room have read an awful lot about how you got there. Let me first editorialise by saying it might have been a clumsy process, but they got the right fella. And I think if everybody had their go again, they still want the outcome. They just would have done it without the bruising along the way. When you enter a job like that, how hard is it to front up to how many thousand people do you employ in transport?
30,000.
30,000. So you first day in the job and they go, "Hi, I'm Josh. You might have heard a bit about me." How's it been, the early entry? And it's not as if you get, it's not as if there's actually daily transport to worry about. You get a good 3 months, just get to know the joint and get underway. How's it been, the kickoff?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for having me up here tonight. It's a great pleasure having attended many of these events before in the past. If anyone doesn't know what Chris is talking about, no need to go and Google it all. That's absolutely fine. You can live without it. But for those, yeah, sure, I came into the role 3 months ago this week, and I expected, taking on the role of Transport Secretary in New South Wales, that it would be a bruising entry. I think for anyone, that is going to be a task that is going to be up there in the lights to some degree, and people are going to have an interest in you and your background and what you bring to the role. That was probably an understatement. It was more so. I've spent more time in parliamentary inquiries over the last 3 months than I have in events like this, talking to the real people that make it happen around Sydney's infrastructure. But look, it's part of the role. Transparency is extremely important. I've got nothing to apologise for, but I'm very keen to get on with the job.
Well, let's get on with the story then. Absolutely. Because you'd pull all the rorts to halve your salary and come and run New South Wales Transport. You're desperately doing that, and for the $20 donation, that would seal the job. Anyway, enough editorialising for me on that stupidity. Let's get on with your role looking forward. Mate, one of the reasons we were so supportive of you in that role, and I should say declaration of all interest in case the Herald or Telegraph are listening, Josh is a former effective partner and member of the Dialogue from his time at Langer O'Rourke. I first knew him as a journalist back in the day, back when he war-torn places and war-torn Sydneys and all sorts of things. But mate, one of the reasons we're very supportive to have you in the job, if you're sitting here in our role, Adam and I and the team have to do, is to try and constantly give Treasury a confidence in transport so they can keep giving us more transport projects, because we're a big part of town and by Christ we still need plenty more transport. We've had plenty and we've got a lot more to go. So it's in our interest to make sure Treasury are confident. You come from the great big contractor world. You've been involved locally and globally from your role in the Executive Committee of Langer O'Rourke in London. And in fact, Josh popped into our East London study tour back in 2019 when he was in London in Australia House. But what do you bring? That sense of the greatest challenge probably to Transport New South Wales, apart from 73,000 inquiries at any one time, is getting control of the cost. We've just seen the federal government today crunch a bunch of projects because of cost blowouts. What do you bring from the other side of the bid arrangement when, you know, poacher becomes gamekeeper? What do you learn? How do you apply that to a better outcome to keep Treasury happy, to keep the funds flowing, to keep the project pipeline underway?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I left government 20 years ago and was lucky enough to go into a great role in the private sector, which continued to grow, and as you said, it took me around the world. But when I made that transition then, I was very aware, and there's a number of people in the room tonight I've had this similar conversation with. Their paths have found similar routes because of that relationship between the delivery of big infrastructure and government's ability to procure it and have confidence in how it's rolling out. Now, I went from government into the private sector to have that conversation, and I was surprised at the time with how far apart the two groups were, despite the enormous spend and the size of the infrastructure that was being committed to. And at the time, for me, that was really around the power industry, more so than transport, although over the years that's something very much involved in particular in the UK. So on coming back to Australia, it was a real discussion that I thought that conversation can be had in terms of trying to work from the contractor side and influence government and through forums like this, or having talked about this for 15 years, maybe it's time that I rolled my sleeves up and see if I could offer something on the other side. That was really where the conversation started and why I applied for the role. And having taken on the role, the welcome has been extremely warm from industry, who feel as though it was time for transport to have someone at the top who had worked in the delivery of major infrastructure. I have found the welcome has been warm inside transport from those who've been working on the big builds of the last 10 years, who were worried about a decline in some of that project pipeline. And I've also found the welcome warm from other people in transport who say, well, we're looking for a few new ideas. We're looking to bring the outside in. So relationships is one of the things that I'll be working on. I know transport has become a behemoth. It is 30,000 people across and that's directly employed through our transport bodies in New South Wales, not counting any of our contracted services. We have $1 in $4 being spent in New South Wales right now is going into transport. And we have a $72.3 billion infrastructure pipeline for the next 4 years. So
I can't imagine why Treasury's worried.
We need the partnerships. We need relationships. Transport can't sit over here and say, we're just going to do the plan that we drew up earlier. We're going to keep going with that no matter what. And housing has been a great example of that, because traditionally government departments might just say, well, we're going to do what we wrote down and we'll see what comes out at the end of the mix. Actively, we're saying it has to be housing focused, and the transport comes in behind it. And I hope that's what everyone here will see over coming months.
What a perfect segue. We host tonight and a summit tomorrow that not only is in partnership with planning and transport, it's about planning and transport, not surprising. They come together, and they're coming together even more now. Firstly, they're in danger of like a serious partnership breaking out between the Department of Planning and Transport of New South Wales and the great Kirsten Fishburn that's with us here tonight and will speak tomorrow. Rumours around town are you two are working way too close together. There is, not those sort of rumours, but I mean, start more Josh Murray rumours. I mean, literally the concept of TODs, transport-oriented developments, special planning nodes around, possibly about metros and other things. For the past few years, all we've heard from developers is transport blaming transport on why we can't get approvals. So I suppose you're both relatively new in this gig, and she's ex-transport, making a plan which isn't her. So without giving, I'd love to give some big trade secrets away, but at least as to the process and the partnership that's brewing, are we looking forward to a much closer working relationship between the two big agencies?
Yeah, I think we can absolutely say that Kirsten and I are committed to that. We were actually announced on the same press release back in July, two halves of that same press release. And as a result, it meant that we had a very early conversation. And I think Kirsten described us at a previous event as sort of brothers and sisters in this role. Look, we are working
Rumour
that
has
way.
it she was the first person to call you.
She was, absolutely. Reached out straight away and said, let's work on this together. We do that now. We meet at least once a month. We bring our long list from our departments of things that didn't quite make it through the normal process, and we go through them and see who we need to call or who we need to meet to make things happen. And that's the way we intend to take things forward. Keep it practical.
That partnership manifests, we're talking about transit-orientated developments, or TODs as known colloquially, and that is where housing intersects with transport and planning, and it's the biggest issue in the world at the moment. In this town, I've come from the Bradfield oration today. I mean, it is Summit Week, and the Premier spoke very proudly about the momentum there. Who's taking the lead on TODs, which is, because you're both in it? Kirsten is, hand up. Okay, question answered. I'll get you back to heckle her tomorrow, you can get square. So with that concept, I know we've got some discussions upcoming with the Metro. This room, I can probably speak for everybody saying, can we get the finger out and get the Metro confirmed to get underway? And I think we're much closer to that than we were a few months ago. I'm told we're waiting for a bit of a chat with the Treasurer, which usually means only one thing in this town, that is there some form of, and I hope there is, some sort of value capture, and we've campaigned openly for a while about the need to pay to play. The mistakes that didn't happen on the North West line, that could happen. Without any specifics again within that, do you come into this from your private sector background with a view of how you can better partner with the private sector rather than just master servant, contractor, client? Are we going to head back to where we were a few years ago before the privatisation cash and pandemic set in and government became all supreme? Is there a way that your partnership in your departments can become a government partnership again with the private sector more productively?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I think we are at a point where we are working through all of those elements. The word I've been using over the recent weeks has been integration, because there is a lot that needs to be cleared, and we need to get on the ramp, and then we need to draw it together. People in this room are aware of multiple projects. You mentioned the development legislative piece that we're looking at. We're not going to comment on that tonight, and you've got ministers on the lectern tomorrow that you can pepper with questions in that regard around timing and shape. But if we get these projects moving through and we get the shape of how we're going to do it, then for me and transport, it becomes about integration of services. And we need to make sure we're not just dropping these projects in one by one, and we're calling on our partnerships with the private sector to work out how we bind them together. And I think the best projects that we've seen have been ones that have stretched out a little bit further than just the project footprint into what they're bringing to communities, what they're bringing to services and employment, and how do we loop that in together. And I did see a bit of that in the UK through Crossrail, which was much maligned at the time. But the company I was working with delivered 5 of those stations, and each one of those was a case study in itself of how those communities were regenerated when those Crossrail stations went in. And I think they, for me, are a great example of how we have that conversation with both the direct deliverers of those projects, but then through the work John Graham's doing on vibrancy and communities, we tie in other business groups to how we can really get the most of each of them as they come online.
So Kirsten brings a background in local government to planning, which I think has given her a much greater appreciation of the challenges that Pierre and Lisa and all their teams are dealing with. In bringing your private sector background into this, what's maybe one specific little thing you learned that you think can improve that relationship, that you've now seen on both sides of the equation? What can this room all do? We all say we want better partnerships. We don't. We want to be the dominant partner in those partnerships. But what can we actually do that you've seen that's going to fundamentally shift the dial?
I think in New South Wales, it needs to be now about staying the course. And that will be difficult given the conversations that's going out there today. And for everyone's benefit, I did leave Jim Betts in my office when I headed out to Olympic Park tonight. Obviously, a huge amount of discussion around funding, but in New South Wales, we have had a pretty good, stable approach to that pipeline, and we can't move away from that. So I would ask that the private sector joins with government to say, let's get really clear about what we're doing, let's be open about it so that we share all that information, and there's no surprises on either side. We know what we need to deliver and when, we know where the money will line up, and we'll stick to our program as we go, because We've seen in this state, and we've seen it in other states when we've had to chop and change, how much it hurts the productivity, and it also drives the skills out to other jurisdictions.
In London, you'd have seen different waves of transport for London. You know, it was ascendant, then it was largely broke, and now it's back. And Greg Clark, great mate of Jeff's, is that the globalist is driving their development corporation. You've inherited in the new role, you've got to do something with Tahi, right? The Transport Asset Holdings entity, which the poor buggers have been condemned, been beaten from pillar to post, everything they've had to do. We've got a metro with all its property retail assets. We've got a Tahi as the owner of both rail and non-rail property assets. Do we think going forward there's likely to be an appetite for some type of development corporation that might pull them together, that might not have the different arms of basically your portfolio all doing at different capabilities, property deals, and then with obviously planning and other agencies built in? Is development corp a dirty word in government at the moment, a word that's being looked more closely at as a way to go forward?
Yeah, we're working through the Tahi scenarios at the moment, and actually it's been a really positive piece of work now that we've got clear policy around it. We will have legislation before the House to start that process, and we're looking at how does that operate within transport. I think what we need to remember is there has always been an independent infrastructure owner within the transport family. It's lived in different places, it's had different names, but we've always...
Infrastructure Corp and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly, we've always kept that to the side. What we need to do now is look at exactly what we want that body to be doing, and there are some lessons, and not necessarily from my experience, but drawing on the London example at the moment around commercialisation and optimisation for the community of certain non-operational sites. And I think they've got a new model that they're doing well, and it has enabled a sustainability lens, as I say, a community engagement lens to some of these stations as they free up space. Now we have to make sure we keep the operational and the safety side always front of mind, but I think there's some good models there that we can use as we look at the next phase of Tahi.
Perfect. We have a huge store of institutional capital, domestic institutional capital from the super funds in Australia. You'd have been tapping it in the past on the developer side. Do you finally see a way we can try and bring some institutional funding back into the mix as you've got to meet? As you mentioned, the feds have today sliced and diced a few around the country, including pretty heavily in New South Wales, including the link from our M7 to our M12, which I'll have a little bit to say about tomorrow. Won't be positive. Do you comfortable that institutional funding is going to find a bigger home here, that you can use it as the privatisation funds have largely gone? We're going to fill it with some local insto funding?
I think we'll need to see how things rebalance over the next little while. I think the industry's been looking for that transition to energy investment separately in terms of the use of our staff and contractors. There's been a weight on defence, which hasn't yet picked up. So transport is still there in very much prime place in each state as an opportunity to invest. On the federal front, and I know you've said to me you'll have more to say, and I think that'll be very helpful, we certainly don't feel that fight or that argument is anywhere near over. And leaving meetings as I did today back at Martin Place, I think we're gearing up for a lot of debate about exactly where that money's going to land, and I'm sure Minister Graham and Minister Halen will cover that tomorrow. But
might have said to the telly today, you can't have a Western Sydney airport if Western Sydney can't get there. It's kind of stupid.
Well, and look, you know, for everyone that's been out to the precinct, the pace and the development and the excitement around the airport and its precinct, Elizabeth Drive, the M12, the metro, they're making a cracking pace, and everyone involved should be commended for the work that's going in there.
Speaking of transport, there's been a certain sort of gravy train running through Sydney in recent years, and to their credit, transport for New South Wales, particularly some of Kirsten's place management agencies, the old GCC, everything, there's been an awful lot of people involved in the consulting space across this city, and you'd have to be a mug not to notice that there's been a significant shedding of some of those staff in recent times, and I feel sorry for those who've been part of that because they've done a lot of good work. Are you noticing that at the client level? I know talking the billion-dollar projects for contractors, but the tens and maybe hundreds of $1,000s project at the other end. Are you seeing that? I wouldn't say carnage is too strong a word, but certainly there has been an impact through the system.
Yeah, well, what there is, I think, is really clear controls. And everyone's been very public about that, government, starting with the feds, but also moving into state jurisdictions. Everyone's been clear that controls, much more strict controls, were in place. And what I think we've seen is a real tapering of discretionary use of those consultancies, which is obviously flowing through. And I've spoken to a number of people about that. I think we were down about 15% on the peak of a couple of years ago, and I would say by the end of this year we've probably dropped another 40% again in transport. And that's trying to generate additional capability internally. It's about the changing shape of the infrastructure pipeline that we've used some of those services to get projects into the mix and through the strategic business cases. But I think it's also a rebalancing of an expectation as well. So I'd say that those levels will probably now sit where they are today.
Before they throw us out of here, you've inherited obviously one of the biggest, most dynamic agencies in terms of economic development. I should pay credit to Transport too. I think a lot of the work we've done, and Adam and Luke and our team and Lauren have been working on the concept of infrastructure, social legacy. And I think Transport for New South Wales has been the exemplar nationally in Indigenous engagement, in empowering women in engineering, in environmental constraints, etc. Do you think that kind of social legacy, and we want more of it, does it survive economic downturn? Is it just something nice you do when there's plenty of money flowing through the system? Or is there a way to entrench it so we don't just get the utility of a transport project, we get the social amenity and advantage of the billions of dollars of transport?
Yeah, absolutely. I was briefed today even on the Rozelle Interchange, some of the and credit to the team members from that project who are here in the room, but some of the Indigenous outcomes on that project are quite stunning and have certainly gone well and truly beyond what was in the contract. That's the sort of performance that really makes you sit up and take notice and say, this is what can be achieved if we allow our delivery partners to use their ingenuity to get into it. I'm absolutely a fan of discrete, unique packages of social benefit through projects rather than a one-size-fits-all paintbrush of we need, X, Y, and Z dictated from the centre. I think if we can get some of that innovation and ingenuity through projects, then that's the energy that spreads to other jobs. So I want to make sure we help share that.
Right, on the way out. They said plenty about you on the way in. I know you're one of the more, it must have shocked you, you're not a guy who puts yourself out there easily. When you leave, when it's all over, I've been a long time, I know nothing else. When you leave at the end of your long and successful career, what will you want your personal legacy to have been? And don't give me the things about that's for ministers. You're running the show. What do you want in administrative sense, your own legacy in transport and 30,000 staff and literally hundreds of billions of dollars of funding? What would you like them to say differently on the way out that they didn't say on the way in?
Yeah, look, I do come from an infrastructure background over the last decade and a half, but I am very focused on services and the passenger experience. And what I don't like in Sydney and New South Wales is where we constantly blame the system, because it talks down all the people that work on it, those 30,000 plus people that we referenced before. It talks down all of our businesses when we want to get people around, and it takes away the opportunities that are in there. If you look at some successes, we've had 100% patronage increase on the airport line, which is one of the most talked about pieces of infrastructure ever, but it's had 100% increase in the last 12 months. We're 19% up on our patronage from this time last year. People are coming back to public transport, and if we can give them a great experience on the way through, then our whole city will work better. Parramatta Light Rail 1 and 2, the metro development that's coming by the middle of next year through the heart of the city will blow people's minds. I'm absolutely assured of it. And I think that is an opportunity to excite everyone and to say, there's opportunities here. Let's spread out. Let's make the most of them. Let's be creative around transport and let's not talk it down. And I say that, I've been in the role now for just on 3 months. Within 80 days, I visited every one of the city's 173 train stations to see what that community looks like when people get off the train, to help educate myself on that experience, and that's what I want to change.
Well said. Well, you'd read plenty about him before, ladies and gentlemen. I can add the fact that this is one of the most decent and nicest fellas I've dealt with in a long time, and I think a bloke who gets both the economic and social dimension of transport, particularly in a place like Western Sydney where the tyranny of distance is still too great a thing for our communities. In letting him go, can you please join me in thanking the man, the myth, the Mandarin, Josh Murray.
Thanks very much. Thank you.